All right, guys, we're now at week 3 of this mini-series, stories that I think really should have been in the book or the movie Black Hawk Down, but they didn't make it. Today, I get a chance to catch up with an old friend, and you will quickly hear from this episode how close Kurt Smith and I are. We spent a lot of time together, working in the same unit, serving multiple times together in different combat zones. But Kurt helped me keep my sanity while I'm in Somalia. And I learned something from this episode 30 years after the battle that I didn't even know. So I am super excited to introduce you to my guest on this episode of Unbeatable, my buddy, Kurt Smith.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Before we get into the interview with Kurt, I want to remind you that it's the Solomon Foundation that made it possible for me to do this episode. These guys are helping the local church grow, and they will help you get an excellent return while making an eternal impact. If you want to know more about the Solomon Foundation, go check them out at thesolomonfoundation.org. Now I get into my conversation with my buddy, Kurt Smith. Kurt, I haven't seen you in a long time, buddy. Thank you for agreeing to be on this episode of Unbeatable with me.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
We are right in the middle of a mini series. The podcast has been around for about 2 years, but for the last 2 weeks, we've been telling stories about events from Somalia that I think should be in the book or the movie Black Hawk Down, but are not. And today I get a chance to learn a little bit from you because there's a part of this story literally 30 years later that I've never heard. So I want to know what happened inside the building when you guys were taking it down. We'll get to that part of the story in just a few. But man, you and I have had a lot of time together when we were both in the Army and serving in special operations. And it's good to catch up with somebody who's kind of like an old friend to me, man.
No, I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to the chat as well. And I'm going to learn something, I'm sure, and some memories will come back to the surface too. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, let's just go down memory lane, man. You and I first started working. This feels like 100 years ago now, but we first started. Not only did we work together, but we actually were neighbors, because we were both sergeants in the Ranger Regiment living in the barracks across the hall from one another, which, good gracious, man, this must have been like 1990, 1991, 92 is when we first started working together in the reconnaissance detachment of the Ranger Regiment. You came there from where? Where were you serving?
I was in 3rd Ranger Battalion, and I tried out. I came over with Mark Colazos. Remember him?
Yeah, of course.
I actually moved in there the night that the air war started for Desert Storm. And
oh, you did?
Yeah. So I was with the duffel bag drag over from 3rd Ranger Battalion, which is a couple buildings away. And
I remember listening to the start of the air war in Desert Storm. I was up in Dahlonega. We were doing a training mission. I had the satellite radio, and they were kind of giving us a play-by-play of the targets that we were destroying over the satellite network. And I was listening to the whole air war go down, sitting on the side of a mountain in Dahlonega. Yeah.
And we were all boo-boo lipped because we didn't get invited.
Yes, of course. All of us wanted to be over there before this thing. None of us knew that it was going to be 4 or 5 months later before the actual ground fight started. But man, I mention you by name to a lot of people. I don't know if this ever gets back to you. It's always in good context. So I don't know if anybody's ever said, man, Jeff talked about you, Kurt. But I mentioned your name to a lot of people.
It has come up a couple times. General LaCamera said, "Hey, Jeff Struecker? Yeah, you're all over his book." I know that's
you are. True, yep.
But I think I mentioned 1 or 2 places. But no, I didn't know that. I'm living rent free in your head.
You are, yeah. There's a couple of times in our, when we cross paths together that you left a really big impact on me. And I don't think I've said it to your face all of those times. So, man, part of this interview for me today is just a chance to catch back up with an old friend. But the other part of it is for me to say thank you because you left a big impact on me as a man, not just as a warrior. A couple of times you did.
That's very humbling because, of course, I hold you in extremely high regard. So it's very humbling to hear that from you.
Well, one of those times you and I were sitting on an MRE box, I think in Iraq or Afghanistan, early in the war, talking about our families, talking about your family, talking about my family, and kind of what was going on in our personal lives. And I, man, I just cherish those moments where you and I were able to be friends and just forget about the war for a few minutes and hang out with each
Yeah.
other like buddies.
Yeah, I do
Um,
remember that. I think it was 2004, and I was not. There was I think it was about March or April of 2004, and
yeah.
something that was not awesome had happened, and it was helpful to hear your perspective on things. And
Perhaps the biggest influence you had on my life you had and never and you didn't know it at the time. I've tried to tell you that since then, but this was right after you came back from Christmas block leave in the reconnaissance detachment, and you came back a very different guy than you were 2 weeks before you left for block leave. And I think you and I've had that story
Mhm.
before. This is the story I mentioned in the book. But wow, man, you were so different that it really, really impacted me. And honestly, it embarrassed me a little bit just watching the way that you were living out this brand new faith of yours. And God really used that moment to challenge me about the way that I was living.
Well, again, it's humbling to hear that. My faith has had highs and lows. All throughout my life. That was definitely a high point, but I'm glad
Yeah.
that some of that was able to rub off and stick on you.
So for this one, I'll just give the listeners kind of the Reader's Digest version of this story. You and I are right across the hall from each other. We're living in the barracks. We were working literally in the same building on the same floor, just the opposite end of the building where our team rooms were. And so we were around each other every day, all day long. And when we got off work, still around each other. And then I saw you come back from a 2 week vacation at home over Christmas, a very, very different guy, and your words started to sound different, your actions started to sound different. And after you left the team room, some of my team buddies started talking bad about Kurt Smith, like this change that was going on in him. And you weren't in the room at the time, but this is a moment that I am ashamed to admit out loud, but it was really important for my future and for my faith. After you left, guys started talking bad about you. And I really didn't want to say this, but I just interrupted the conversation. And I was like, hey, you guys, I share Kurt's faith. And this is what embarrasses me, Kurt. Everybody in the room said, wait, what? You and him have the same faith? And this is the really embarrassing part. Jeff, I would have never known that you share Kurt's faith. And I basically
Mhm.
said, shut up. You guys need to stop talking about him behind his back and stop talking about his faith because I share his faith. And I am embarrassed to this day at their response. Jeff, I would have never known
Mhm.
because of the way that you lived that you shared Kurt's faith. And God used that moment to really punch me in the gut. And I needed that gut punch.
Yeah, well, we've all had those moments. I think I
Yeah.
don't know anybody who hasn't, but I certainly have had similar, um, punches in the nards like that. So I
Yep.
understand.
What we're doing now is the highlight reel. So I'm going to fast forward. You literally move on to bigger and better things when you leave the Ranger Regiment, but I stick around. And I basically do the opposite. I leave recon and go over to 3rd Ranger Battalion. And the next time you and I spend some quality time together, and I'm putting quality time in air quotes for everybody who's driving,
Right.
is sitting in an airfield, sitting in a hangar on an airfield in Mogadishu, Somalia, fighting off endless days and weeks sometimes
Mm.
of boredom while we're in Somalia together. So I'm going to pitch this part of it to you. Where were you at? What were you doing when we all kind of came together in your neck of the woods and started the spin up for Somalia?
Well, from the regimental reconnaissance detachment, I went and tried out for Delta, and I didn't think that I was 22 years old when I actually went to selection. I had no um, expectation that I was going to get picked up, and it was a
Uh-huh.
surprise to me when I did. And I went to operator training course that was 6 months long. Spent about
Uh-huh.
8 months in squadron, and then we started doing the train up for Somalia. So I don't know if we crossed paths at any time during that, but I don't know. That was probably 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Uh, uh,
No, I think the first time I saw you was when we were kind of falling in on your compound, getting ready to load aircraft and getting ready to head off to Somalia together,
yeah,
which is kind of like getting a chance to hang out with an old friend
yeah,
uh, together. And we're in different units, but in the
mhm,
same task force, in the same
right,
hangar. And for the listeners, I wish you could see just how miserable this airplane hangar was, right? The
yeah,
doors are broken. We're on the airfield, literally just 100 yards from the runway. Aircraft landing with the engines at full throttle all day and all night long, and there's several hundred of us living in a metal box in the middle of Africa in the middle of the summer where it is just brutally hot.
hmm,
And I link up with my old buddy Kurt, and
yeah.
you and I just start to pass the time together.
Yeah, cots, right next to each other,
Green
not yours,
Green Army cots 3 feet away from each
right?
other. Yeah,
And trying to set up little sandbag abutments to compartmentalize the fragments from mortar attacks. And yeah, it was and for the whole time that we were there, like 6 weeks or so, we only did like 7 missions. So you're
yeah,
on average once a week. The rest of the time you're twiddling your thumbs, doing some signature flights, getting on there and getting a flight around the city. But being as young and foolish as we're literally hanging out there, praying for war,
right.
uh,
Yeah,
in air quotes again. So yeah, no, that was it was a little bit of range time, do some first aid training, play some
yeah,
volleyball, get some good tan, on my Teva sandals,
that's right. Yeah.
and yeah, and wait for the next mission.
I want to make sure the listeners understand this. When you read the book or when you watch the movie, war books, war movies, they only talk about the action. But ask anybody who's ever been there. The famous quote is, war is moments of sheer
Mhm.
terror punctuated by weeks or sometimes months of insane boredom.
Yes.
And that was definitely the case in Somalia, right?
Definitely. I mean, one of the things that I have a reputation for back in C Squadron was I'd carry this fly swatter around, and I would literally count how many flies
Yes,
kill.
I love it.
So, I mean, that was something like I was, okay, before every meal I'm going to go through, I'm going to kill 500 flies. And that was not difficult to do. But yeah, that was good times.
Do you know? No kidding. I still tell my family about you and I having fly killing competitions in the dining facility, the big
Yeah,
tent out there,
right.
right before mealtime, trying to see how many flies you can actually kill in one swat.
That's right.
There were so many flies.
That's right.
We were counting. What's the record you could kill in one
Yeah.
swat? And I still remember my record. I've told my children this, and they look at me like, "There's no way possible you killed that many
How many
flies with
was it?
one swat of a fly swatter. 17
Oh
flies in
yeah.
one swat."
You crushed me.
But no, you were laying waste to those 500 flies,
Yeah.
and there were flies so thick that, I mean, honestly, it took you about 15 minutes to kill
Oh
500 of
yeah.
them, and you walk away and there's 5,000
That's
more
right.
waiting for you.
That's right. The
Yeah.
key was to get it right underneath where the Kool-Aid dispenser came out, because that's where
Yeah, all of that sugar water.
yeah.
Boom. Yeah, I those are good times right there, man. We spent some time just hanging out on your cot or on my cot in that hangar, talking about our families, talking about
Mhm.
life, not just talking about the unit, the
Yeah.
mission, what's coming down the pipe, but just hanging out and being buds. And Kurt, if it wasn't for you, I would have lost my mind about a dozen times in Somalia. Um, let's get into the fight, because really people right now are like, okay, these two bros, they've
Yeah.
got a bromance going on. Really what they want to hear is about the fight. So you go into the target on Little Birds. I roll into the target on Humvees. And there's a part of this fight 30 years later that I've really never heard.
Mm,
Because I just keep getting a lot of the Rangers that tell me they're
yeah.
rolling it. But for the listener, will you just kind of give them the account of what happens from the time that the Little Birds kind of hit the target to the time that we meet up on the city streets? And I think we met up on the city streets maybe early on, or middle of this fight.
Yeah. So so the Delta contingent or whatever, or the main effort, so to speak, was on 4 Little Birds, and I was on the 4th one, and each one had 4 assaulters on it, so there were 16 of us. We were supposed to go in. They look at the imagery and they say, hey, you're going to land in these areas, and of course, the first aircraft that start going in there started pulling up all this,
Yeah.
the just getting dusted out. So we ended up, my team was F team. 2 or 3 blocks down the road is where they ended up putting us down. And I remember I'm coming in on the I was on the front side of the
Uh
pod
huh.
there on the left side. I'm holding the fast rope in my hand. I'm looking down trying to see the
Yeah.
ground, and all of a sudden I can't see the ground. All I see is brown out,
It's
and all of a
brown.
sudden
Yeah.
this thing
Brown
hit
out.
the ground. And I was like, "Holy crap!" Okay, so I throw the fast rope in the back, grabbed my weapon, and we assaulted into the first building and just kind of made our way down to the target building. By that time, the assault was in progress.
Yeah.
There was never a whole. Well, I don't want to say never. I don't know of any times where they were killing bad guys inside buildings. And I
Yeah.
think for the most part, what we saw was, okay, they were in the buildings and they're like, okay, the gig's up. These guys wearing black Kevlar are coming in. We're just going to throw our weapons out the window and just kind of give up and pretend like we're supposed to be here. So
Yeah.
we F team came in. Joined the assault in progress, ended up out onto the rooftop, and that's where I kind of saw, all right, things are starting to go bad,
Uh
and
huh.
lots of firing outside. There was maybe 1 or 2 other missions where there were a significant amount of firings, but this one was like, okay, the volume of the firing was quite a bit, and I saw Rangers out there setting up blocking positions. I saw them trying to police up fast ropes that they had
Yeah.
landed in. And so we're like, okay, well, we've got our detainees. We end up going back down to the bottom of the target building, which was, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5
Uh huh.
stories or whatever, and started kind of consolidating, getting ready to move these detainees um,
To the
to
vehicles,
the
right?
vehicles. That's right. And so lots of firing outside. I remember our troop sergeant major comes in. His name is Ben Free. He comes in. He's like, "Woo, woo!" like having a good time or whatever. And I was like, not really thinking this was a good time. I turned to
Yeah.
one of my fellow OTC mates. His name is Steve Cash, and he's like, "This is some shite." And I'm like, "Yeah." And then I saw one Ranger, holding a pressure dressing up to his
Yeah.
neck,
Uh
and
huh.
it was blood, or red with blood. So that was the first casualty I saw. I know that some stuff had happened before that outside, but we were getting ready at that point to basically offload our detainees off to the Rangers. And then of course we got the word that a helicopter had crashed, and we're like, okay, where's the helicopter? And we pointed somewhere that way,
Yeah.
which back in
Which
those
is
days.
not good. That's not a good mission to go on. Somewhere that way,
Right.
in the city streets. You didn't have a chance to see the bird go down? You weren't
I
on the
didn't.
rooftop at that point,
Well,
right?
if it was, I was not aware of.
Uh-huh.
I think I was probably coming back down when it went.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we probably would have heard about it before. But when I heard that a helicopter had been crashed, we were already back downstairs, out in the courtyard. Kind of consolidating to move out.
Yeah, I try to tell people just how impressive, just how efficient your unit was not just in this target, but all of the targets that we hit. That first target, when we hit Radio Mogadishu or the Russian compound, or when we pulled Osmanato out of his target. I try to explain to everybody just how fast and how efficient your unit is, but I think most people, their eyes glaze over and they don't get a really good perspective of it. Because if you've never had a chance to see it firsthand, it's really, really hard to understand just how incredibly well organized you guys are and how well you work with one another.
Yeah. I mean, that just comes down to repetition. I mean, we have so many repetitions of doing, clearing rooms or whatever, that literally how I would describe it is when you've done that many repetitions with that small of a group of people, you literally can just read.
You know how each other thinks, right?
That's right. And there's really not much that needs to be said. A glance or something like that. You just kind of intuitively understand exactly what. It's kind of this hive group think of going through the building and clearing it with very, very little. It's how battle drills are supposed to be, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Except done at the highest level, because all the training distractions are removed, and you just edit very sharpened to a sharp edge.
And to the listener out there, man, the stuff that you see in the movies, they don't even come close to just how effective, just how incredible, just how talented you and those guys are in the city streets. And of course, I'm never going to give away national secrets, but man, what I saw just watching you guys in training, what I saw over in Somalia, I was like, I don't know anybody on the planet in history that can pull off what you guys are pulling off right now. It was that impressive.
Yeah, I don't want to take. I mean, it's certainly not me, and it's not just the units that was impressive. I mean, the whole task force. I mean, you remember General Garrison?
Yeah.
When we first landed there in Mogadishu, he was like, "Hey, this task force that's been assembled right here. The aviators, the Rangers, the Tier 1 organization." He said, "This is the most capable." Organization that's ever been assembled on the face of the earth. And at that point in 1993, that was definitely so. Like we were given Mission Impossible to go pull a guy out of a hostile city, and there was no other organization that could have ever been close to accomplishing that up until then.
I want to camp on that quote for just a second, because I remember we got off of the aircraft. We're all kind of filing into that airplane hangar, and Garrison gathers us around and makes that statement. And I thought, man, look, this is just a commander trying to pump us up, getting ready for this. I'm looking around the room and I'm like, everybody in this room is talented, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I've come to believe that Garrison's statement was absolutely true. I just didn't recognize it when he was saying it. It was after the fight was over with that I was like, I think he was right.
Yes. Yeah, I believe the same thing. I was like, okay, he's just pumping us up, but because all commanders are going to say you're the best, right?
Yeah, this is the best that's ever lived, right?
But no, it's very clear to me in retrospect that was a true.
Right after the movie Black Hawk Down came out, I was doing an international news broadcast, and it started off pretty friendly, but at some point the attitude of the reporter changed and it started to become pretty hostile. And then they started digging into my shorts. It was just me and this international news crew. Mm-hmm. And they started asking me about how this talented of a force, with all of our training and all of our equipment, with you guys and everything else that we had, how could you, I'm putting air quotes, lose this bad? How could you mess this up this bad? And man, I started to get so furious during this interview. I realized that these guys that are interviewing me don't have a bit of experience, no combat. So nothing that I say next is going to make sense to them. But then I just kind of reminded them, listen, if you look at the math, and I just use this term, if you look at the math, the number of us that were in the streets, the number of Somalis that we were fighting against, the number of us that survived, and the number of the Somalis that died, I don't know any force, and now I'm kind of hearkening back to General Garrison's statement, I don't know any force ever assembled that will walk away from that scenario with a different, with that kind of math or better, every other force that's ever been assembled, it's going to be much worse than that. You can call it a failure if you want, but tactically, we did exactly what we were supposed to
Right.
do. It just was very bloody to do it.
Right. No, 100%. Like they're mistaking the strategic loss from the tactical success. So when you talk about all the failures of Operation Restore Hope and then Unisom 2 and all of those objectives that they were trying to meet, and then you look at what we were asked to do and what we accomplished, we captured all 3 guys that we were sent there to pull off the target that day. And we got a bloody nose out of it.
In record time, because we knew we're rolling into the Bakara market.
Yes.
We knew there was going to be a lot of guns, didn't know how many, but we did it basically in record time. You just happen to have multiple Blackhawks starting to get shot down before we actually get all the way off the target. At this point in the fight, I have already left the target building. I'm taking Todd Blackburn back, come under a massive ambush. Dominic Pill is killed, vehicles shot to pieces. And I start to try to roll out to the city streets a few minutes later with a couple of guys from your unit on the Humvees with me. And we're trying to get to the Durant crash site and again come under intense gunfire, ambush, and don't actually make it all the way to the crash site before we link up with a part of the assault force that's coming back with Danny McKnight. Would you talk through what happens after the helicopter gets shot down? You're still on target. You still got the detainees, but we haven't flexed to the next part. So what happens with you next after Cliff Wolcott goes down?
So we get the word that there's been a helicopter crash, and we're
by the way, somewhere that way, we don't know where, we don't know how far, just that direction.
Right. Because, nowadays it's just intuitive. I mean, most guys in the Army think, well, I have a GRG, right? I have an overhead imagery with some graphics on it. That didn't exist. We invented that stuff back in 1993.
I had the only satellite map in the entire task force. It was on the dash of my Humvee, and I'm trying to figure out one street from the next that has no distinguishing markings whatsoever.
Right. I think my team, I didn't have it, but my team had an overhead imagery of the target area and maybe a couple blocks around it. But you go a couple blocks, you're off the map.
Yeah.
Right. So you're literally
off the map.
Nothing. That's right. And of course, we didn't even have graphics on it at that point. So the grid reference graphic, it was just a graphic or just an imagery. There was no grid. There was no other graphics on it. So no, we ended up, it's that way. And so I'm like, I'm F4 on the team, the fourth guy, 4 IC. And so I'm just, I'm following my team leader, and we and a bunch of Rangers that were, part of the blocking position apparatus there started moving, and this green snake, what was it? It must have been eastward. And then we turn north towards the target. Again, I don't know what the impetus of that turn. I think it was a call from the C-2 aircraft that got to us. We turned towards the target. There was incoming fire, but not super effective. But once we turned north, it was on. And maybe 2 or 3 blocks north of that, unbeknownst to me, was the crash around down an alleyway. And so we fought forward a couple blocks and ended up just like, we're taking casualties now. Earl Fillmore was killed right in front of me. Took one right.
Was he on your team?
He was not. He was in a different troop, but we were just all, kind of mixed in together. So I watched him drop. I watched Mike Mosier get hit. He got hit through the forearm there. And they're like, we're getting inside. And so we all kind of take cover. And at that point, we're kind of fixed, unable to maneuver and kind of return fire because we had very few firing ports. So we're using my position. Captain Steele ended up in my position. He kind of wanted to hang out outside where he could see. That's when Jim Lechner got hit. We pulled him inside. I looked down at him. He was just
his leg was mangled, right?
That I'd ever heard in my life. Really, really affected me. And it looked like, somebody just turned on a garden hose and sprinkled blood on the ground as they were pulling them in. I was like, okay, yeah, I don't want
This is
that to
bad,
happen.
right?
That's right. And so lots of Rangers getting pulled in there. We're putting them back there. I think Kurt Schmidt was there, or
Yeah.
Bart Bullock was there. He was one of
Uh-huh.
our medics. He was treating those guys. And then finally, hey, actually, I'm out of sequence here. We were telling Captain Steele, hey, you need to get inside. You need to get inside.
Right.
He gets
Yeah.
inside and starts coming. And Jim Lackner was right behind him. And that's when he got hit. We were, doing our best to provide covering fire for that or suppressive fire. But
Yeah, this is part of the conversation that I was really looking forward to, because the part that you're telling me now, Kurt, I didn't know. And man, this is 30 years later. You and I have been together many times since then, and we've just never had this I feel stupid for never having this conversation with you.
I haven't told this story in a decade or two. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for telling it to our audience. I want to make sure that the listeners understand this, because I try to explain what you just said to people, and those that are not in the military, even, to be honest, those that have been in the military but have never really been in an intense gunfight. When you just use the phrase "it was on," I know exactly what those words mean. But the truth is, there's very few guys on the planet that know exactly what those words mean. So I describe for audiences, look, I'm driving down the road, we're getting shot at, but I'm not that worried about gunfire. And everybody's looking at me like, are you stupid because you're getting shot at?
Yeah.
And I tell them, look, man, I've been shot at. I know how close they are. I can hear by the round going over my head how accurate it is. Wait a second. I turn the corner. It's on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I'm trying to explain to people, what does that look like? And they're still struggling with, wait, I need to go back. You're getting shot at as Kurt, you and this green snake is moving down the streets, but it's not that big of a deal because it's not that effective of gunfire. And I'm not sure how many people that are listening right now will get this, but I can describe it, but can you describe for everybody the difference between, okay, that one's far enough over our head, I don't need to worry about. All right, that one is close and we need to start tightening up a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, I may be a minority on this, but like, to hear a gunshot when you're downrange, it sounds like like this. All you're hearing is a sonic crack, right?
Right.
It sounds like like that. It's like a snapping sound, and after the snapping sound, you might hear the report of the rifle.
Right.
So it would be like boom, boom, and you're hearing this, of course, rapidly. So when I hear that, especially when I got earplugs in, I'm not really tracking, okay, was it close or was it far? I don't know. Nobody's getting hit around me.
Right.
That's not effective. So that's kind of when it's more, if you see the strike of the round in the ground, in the walls beside you, now okay, that it's becoming definitely more effective. Or, of course, when dudes start dropping. But like, if a round goes next to my ear or it's 5 feet away, I'm not going to know the difference from that, especially wearing earplugs.
I was just having this very conversation 2 weeks ago with Matt Eversman, and we were talking about when I went up to get to Mike Steele's position and try to figure out where is Todd Blackburn. I got to get him. I got to get him on the Humvees and get him out. And his position is under fire, but it's far enough over our heads, and I don't have ear pro in, that everybody around him keeps ducking when the rounds go over their head. And I couldn't help myself. I started laughing out loud. First, do you realize how ridiculous you look?
It's too late.
If you're ducking, the round is already going to hit you if it was going to hit you. But secondly, that's far enough over your head that it's not really decisive. And then a couple of rounds start to hit the wall and the dirt in front of us. Okay, that's close. Now you want to get your head down.
Yeah.
Because the next one might take your head off.
That's right.
And it's hard to explain. I'm laughing about it now because it was just kind of comical. If you're ducking, the round has already gone over your head. Like you said, you're hearing the sonic boom, the mini sonic signature after it's already passed over you. If you're ducking because you heard it, it's too late.
That's right.
But when you turn the corner and start to head north towards the crash site, now it's on. Can you describe the difference between we're getting shot at, now it's on? What's the difference for the listener?
I mean, it's just it's the volume. So and what I mean by that is just the intensity or the frequency of the rounds that are coming in. So before it was like or something like that, and then you start turning north, and all of a sudden you see bursts of automatic fire are
Yeah,
starting
yeah,
to come, and then dudes are getting hit. Right, a guy gets hit in front of you, you're taking things a lot more seriously
yeah.
now. And you're I mean, that's the thing too, is that there was this sense of arrogance that plagued us, I think, the rest
Totally
of the
agree.
task
Yes, I
force.
totally agree.
Like, hey, I'm big bad Delta Force guy. Like, I'm feeling pretty invincible right now with my body armor and my high tech Car 15 with the aim point at the time, and nobody's going to come near me because when I'm out on the range, all the targets drop and they get hit when I shoot at them. Right.
Right.
So it's just you see somebody get hit in front of you, and oh, that's somebody that or oh, that is somebody that you admired and respect in the assault
Yeah. You
troop.
looked up to him a lot,
Somebody like
right?
that guy was invincible to me, and he just got, his life is gone.
In an instant.
There's no getting it back. And you're like, no, I want to rewind. No, I want to replay on that. That's it. They're gone.
Yeah.
And that is I don't know the word for that right now. It's just shocking when you see
Yeah.
something like that.
I want to make sure the listener is hearing this. This is priceless, honest conversation about what it's really like in war. To everybody that's out there that's, kind of a generation younger than us, it is nothing like Call of Duty, is what you and I are saying right now, right? And like you, Pella takes a round in the forehead. He's dead before his body hits the floorboard. It's obvious he's dead. There's no amount of, first aid that's going to get him back. And all of us start to realize, we're all going to die. We're all going to die in the next city block. We're not even going to make it back to the base. We're not even going to make it to the next city block because of the volume of gunfire. And man, I've been in gunfights in Iraq and Afghanistan since Panama, Desert Storm, but nothing, not even a fraction of what we saw in Somalia. It isn't even the same ballpark.
Yeah. And I would tell you, Jeff, I wasn't with you on the convoy, but like, I regard that you guys saw way more volume than we did. I mean, you just kept going through the same ambush site. Well, okay, I just thought of this. Okay. So as we're moving east from the target building, before we had turned north, somebody's convoy, it was yours, or no, it wasn't yours.
That was McKnight's convoy. Yep.
Okay. They passed from north to south right in front of us. Okay,
right.
That's important. And, before, whenever I'd see these guys, they're like, oh yeah, where's the targets? Let me freaking hammer somebody.
Big bad dudes ready to kill some
down
people.
in the chair like this.
Of course.
And
of course they are.
That had an effect on me. I was like, because at that point I had no idea what they had gone through. They might have gone through all kinds of stuff before that, but it was obvious that those guys no longer were the brave guys that they were before. Of course, they're still brave, but like they're the arrogant. They had ditched the arrogance. We had not done that yet, and we were about to find out ourselves. To one degree or the other.
I've had countless people ask me in a Q&A session after I talked, doesn't it seems pretty arrogant what you guys were doing over there? And I said, to be honest, America needs a force with a degree of arrogance. Yeah. What you and I didn't know is just how many Somalis, just how many guns, just how many RPGs, and that would have taken the arrogance right out of me or you before the first person hit the target if I would have known the numbers, but nobody could give us an accurate count of the numbers. It wasn't until the fight was over with that we started to get an idea of the numbers.
Yeah.
But the arrogance it's not a bad thing until it causes you to make some tactical mistakes. And I think arrogance can do that.
Yeah. When the arrogance is good until you can't adapt from the arrogance and then it starts to kill you. But it's not only that, it's what Panama, we were fighting the PDF, right?
And they gave up, literally locked themselves in their own handcuffs and turned themselves into me on a hillside in Panama.
And they were uniformed,
Yeah.
right? These guys were not. This
Right.
is one of the first ones. I think what was Bosnia was after this. I mean, okay, this was basically the start of the Banana Wars,
Yeah.
where they learned from previous engagements with not only us but also with other UN forces that were there, from Restore Hope and Unisom too, that we can exploit the rules of engagement.
Yep.
And
Ditch the uniform, use
right,
human shields, give
that's right,
AK-47s to kids. We'll do it all.
that's right.
Yep.
So, and I don't have to worry about collateral damage. If I just stick my rifle around a corner and spray, I don't care where those are going to hit. I'm
Right.
not going to be held responsible for that. So that the warfare was a lot different than the Panama and the Desert Storm before that. The warfare was completely different.
I even said that to my squad the day that we got off the C5 and got greeted by a mortar attack on the operations center. And I said, listen, man, in Panama, they surrendered. In Iraq, they surrendered by the tens of thousands, literally. And in Somalia, we get off the airplane and they greet us with mortar fire. This is an enemy that's going to, I said it out loud to my squad. This is an enemy that's going to fight. Finally, we found an enemy that's going to fight back. I just had no idea how tenacious they would be.
Yeah, and not only that, so the enemy is tenacious, and the force is hesitant to respond to that, right? Because I remember talking to you about this, weeks before that. We were talking about actions at the blocking position,
Yeah,
and we were saying, I was like, Jeff, you got to set up the signs, and then the cones, and
then the non-lethal force before I can get to the lethal force.
That's right. And then I said, you got to take the decision making out of it, and like, hey, when they cross this line, you shoot. No matter what, you shoot. And remember, you were saying one of your privates was, and you told one of your privates this, when he crosses that line, you shoot. And he's like, no way, Sergeant, I'm not shooting until you tell me to. And that was the way it was done, right? Because like it was like the rules of engagement were, if he didn't have a gun, you can't shoot him, right? Because that was the mother of all determining of whether the guy was enemy or not.
I will never forget that very painful rules of engagement briefing that you and I sat through up in the conference room for what seemed like 6 hours, asking question after question about what can I do. And here's what I said to my men. After this is over with, my team leaders are waiting for me. All the rest of my guys are asleep. And my team leaders say, well, what's the deal, Sergeant? What's the rules? And I said, here's the rule. You do what I tell you to do. Your fire team does what you do. And if there's any problems or any questions, I'll get court-martialed for it. Don't worry about, I'm not even going to try to explain what I just went through in that ridiculous rules of engagement briefing.
Right.
And let's get back to the action, man. I could get off subject with you plenty of times. Okay, so now you guys have become kind of the big casualty collection point that's pretty well depicted in the movie Black Hawk Down. Lots of casualties. You're still not at the crash site yet. And I know this term, you know this term, but for the listeners, you're basically combative ineffective at this point. Can you explain what that means and why to the listeners?
Well, I would say you're combat ineffective when you're no longer able to maneuver or do your mission. So we would collected so many casualties that we didn't even have enough guys to move
the casualties
unilaterally. We needed help. So, there was discussions of calling in medevac. I knew that wasn't possible. Like it started to get dark. We had to mark our positions. We're taking our IR strobe lights off our gear and we're throwing it on top.
Throwing it on the roof.
We can mark our position. There was at one point a MH-60 Black Hawk that was sent and was dumping off ammo outside that guys had to run out and get. We ended up moving one building closer with some drama. And we pretty much held up there. It was like this 4-way intersection, again, short of the crash site. There were Rangers that were still up there, and there were some Delta teams across the street and catty corner to it. But I mean, we were starting to try to build a defense, right? And literally, we were calling in airstrikes from little birds within 25 meters,
Yeah,
literally
yeah,
across the street. And we're
yeah.
like, okay, this is my strobe, like catty corner across the street from the
Do you
back.
see my strobe?
And
Don't shoot the
yeah,
strobe.
with overhead fires, which
Right.
is a
Yeah.
no go, right? So like,
Right.
I'd seen that in Panama where we got strafed by
Yeah.
overhead
Right.
fires and
Yeah.
lost a guy and got some other guys really seriously wounded. So I saw the silhouettes coming up. I was like, holy crap! And then bah, miniguns
Yeah.
right overhead with rockets. But they were gnat's ass. They were dead
Yeah.
on.
I've said this many times. It is the miniguns
Mm-hmm.
in the little birds and the Blackhawks that carried the brunt of the fight
Mm-hmm.
from the time that the sun went down, basically until the time that it came back up
Yeah.
the next morning. Man, the amount of gunfire that they put on those city streets. One of the only reasons I'm alive today is because of the miniguns on the little birds and the Blackhawks.
They had two teams, and they were literally fueling and rearm and just switching out all night.
Fueling and going empty on guns, and
Right.
then changing out, going empty on guns, and coming back for more fuel and more ammunition. Yeah,
I only knew one of those guys, and his name was Paul White, and I only knew him because we played volleyball. And I was like, hey man, like, what did you see afterwards? He's like, dude, I'm flying down. There'd be a whole bunch of dudes running down the street. The number one guy would hose those guys, kill a bunch. They'd scatter, and then they would get back on
they'd
the
all
road just in time
collapse
for
back
number two.
together.
And
Yeah,
and they were just slaying it.
stacking bodies all day long, all night long. Yeah. How long did you stay at the casualty collection point? Talk us through when you actually get out of the city and finally make it back to the hangar. How did that work for you? How did that go for you?
We went in at what, 15:30. By
Yeah.
I don't know, 16:30ish. We're at the casualty collection point. After it
And
got dark,
combat
maybe
and effective.
right
Yeah.
after it got dark, maybe 2000, 8 o'clock at night, we move forward, and then I don't know, maybe 3 in the morning, whenever it was that the 10th Mountain guys showed.
Yeah, the 10th Mountain showed up.
So 10th Mountain shows up. We load all our dead, load all our casualties. Then my team goes down to pry the guys out of the Blackhawk.
So you took the crash site apart to get
I
bodies
pulled
out.
bodies apart with a cargo strap
Yeah.
hooked to a Humvee.
Yeah.
So and so they literally, we pulled them out in pieces to get them out of there, and we torched the aircraft on the way. Then it was okay. There were V-150s that were lined up kind of like strikers, and so we're like, okay, where do we sit? Well, there's no more room, right? So they're like, okay, you're going to run alongside of these vehicles and use them as cover, and we're like, okay, and so we did that for about 2 or 3 blocks, and then they just bailed. So literally
they hit the gas pedal.
Yeah. So literally, what is that? Hullwadig Street, right about where the Target building, the Olympic Hotel. It was okay. We're shop to shop, and at that point, it was literally, if it moved, we were shooting it.
Yeah.
And we just weren't playing at that time because this bizarre thing that where Somalis think that war is a spectator sport, and they're all going to stand on the side of the road and watch that stuff. Just was not working anymore because that they ended up becoming human shields for militia guys. So like we were killing everybody on the way back, and many of those guys were out to make trouble anyway. So we ended up the Mogadishu mile, so to speak. I don't think it's a mile, but it was a good PT event. We ended up, they had a bunch of Humvees lined up for us. We loaded those up, still fighting. We were still receiving fire. And then we kind of started driving out and broke kind of out of the hostile section of the city. And then we started getting friendly waves and stuff like that. Ended up at the Pakistani stadium. And
you rode back on our Humvees. The last 4 Humvees out of the entire city was my 2 and Larry Moore's and the other Humvee from another Ranger squad. And the whole convoy left us. Literally, the tanks left, the Army personnel carriers left, 10th Mountain left. We're driving down the street, my platoon leader, Larry Morris, says, "Hey, Jeff, you're literally the last vehicle in the order of movement. Everything behind you is bad guys." And last week, I just interviewed Brad Paulson, who's riding the 50 cal private, been in the Army for 18 months. And he says, "Hey, Sergeant, there's a bunch of dudes running down the street chasing us." And I said, "Well, Brad, light them up, man. There's nothing but bad guys behind us." And Brad says, "No, those are our guys." So I try to get the platoon leader on the radio, can't make comms. I drive up to him real quick and say, "Man, we got to go back to the target building." And we load as many people. I'm talking maybe a dozen guys per Humvee.
Wow.
In those last two Humvees, and drag them out of the city streets. And with the pedal floored, trying to drive uphill to the Pakistani stadium, the vehicle's going about 12 miles an hour because of the amount of weight on it. But the volume of gunfire, I will never forget. When we rolled back out about midnight, 11 o'clock at night, to try to get to you at the casualty collection point, the street just erupted with gunfire, both sides of the street. And this is tracer rounds that are going across both sides of the street like the 4th of July. And I'm thinking, we don't even have this much ammunition in our American ammunition supply. Where are all of these RPGs, hand grenades, and where are all of these bullets coming from? Because it never let up on National Street all night long. Never. There was never a law in action. And every time there was an aluminum round fired or something, it just got super intense for a few minutes and then never let up all night long. Literally, anybody else would have run out of ammunition early in the night. Kurt, the one memory, though, that has stuck with me, I don't think I'll ever forget it, is I'm the last vehicle out. I'm looking down National Street, getting ready to turn and head up to the Pakistani stadium. And the sun is coming up and the street is literally glowing. It almost looks like the entire street is made out of gold.
Wow.
And I couldn't figure out what I'm looking at, and it didn't make any sense to me. And then it occurred to me, and of course, everybody's still firing around me, lots of rounds going out everywhere. And then I was like, that's brass casing. The entire city street is so covered with brass casing that the street itself looks like it's made out of brass or out of gold because the sunlight is reflecting off of it. And then I was trying to just do some mental math. This is 100,000 rounds of brass casing all over the city streets. And that's just from us, not from them. When we talk about a fight, unlike, what America has seen really since Vietnam, or even, a couple of the prolonged firefights in Iraq or Afghanistan, some of those just don't compare to the volume of gunfire in Somalia. And man, as not just as a friend and a guy that I highly look up to, but as a warrior, watching you, listening to you, talking to you after it was over with, sitting in that hangar, and just unloading with you, man, I cannot thank you enough for what you did on those city streets, man.
It makes me uncomfortable when people, thank me for my service or whatever. I was glad to do it. I was glad to serve, and that was just one other area that, looking back, I was fortunate enough to be there. I don't know how I'd think about it if I was missing body parts like some of our
buddies are.
But man, I appreciate the sentiment.
Yeah, man.
And
all of the times that we passed each other in training or in combat, there has been this moment where like, okay, if Kurt is here, then no matter how bad it gets, at least I got somebody that I can unload to, open up with, just hang out with. And whenever it gets super boring, we'll play a game of volleyball on a hot asphalt, volleyball court just to pass the time. Bro, thanks for giving me a little bit of your time. Thanks for being part of this episode today and giving me a chance to just catch up with you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I had a good time.
All right. Yeah, we'll catch you later.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Wow. I just learned some things in a conversation with Kurt Smith that I haven't heard before ever. I just remembered some things about Somalia that I have frankly forgot 29 years ago. Kurt, thank you for being so open. Thank you for being willing to tell your part of the story that you haven't told in a long time. And I just want to say thank you once again, Kurt, for your friendship, not just in that airplane hangar in Somalia, but many times on in many assignments and many battlefields since then. I want to thank the guests. I also want to thank the listening audience. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being so loyal. Thank you for staying connected. If you're just finding this podcast, why don't you go ahead and subscribe on YouTube? We do a video, or follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find out more information about our guests, about the episodes, about what's coming up on social media. We're pretty much everywhere on social media. Just go to your favorite social media platform and search @Unbeatable Podcast, and you'll find out more information about the show. But you'll also find some pretty amazing guests, like our fan of the week this week, Corey Otto. Corey, thank you for being so engaged. Thank you for staying connected with us. Thanks for following us on social media. Kurt was there for me when I was having some hard times in combat. I was there for Kurt when he was having some hard times in life and in combat. And I developed a little tool. It's totally free. It's a PDF resource for you if you're going through some hard times. If you want my Unbeatable Army Survival Guide, I'll give it to you totally free. All you need to do to get it is just simply go to unbeatablearmy.com. And while you're there, you'll get more information. I send content to you each week. So if you want that survival guide, just go over to unbeatablearmy.com. Thanks for tuning in the middle of this mini-series. Can't wait till you get a chance to hear from my next guest. Next week, you get a chance to hear what happened in the aircraft from one of the most amazing pilots I've ever seen, Dan Gelato. So you got to be back here next week. See you next time.